The federal government is demanding that major Canadian grocers come up with a plan to help stabilize prices, which has drawn pushback from the food industry. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the call comes as Canadians continue to struggle with inflation. And he says the government will be asking the 5 largest grocery companies, which include Loblaws, Metro, Empire, Walmart, and Costco, to come up with that plan by Thanksgiving. For more on this, we're joined live by Mike von Massow, who's a food economist and associate professor at the University of Guelph. And thank you so much for joining us, Mike. Let's get right into it. A plan from grocers. What could that look like?
Well, I'm not sure what it could look like. Clearly, the federal government is abdicating its own responsibility. I think it's easy to point fingers at the grocers, and we have seen record profits, and I think that's a valid discussion to have. But there is remarkably little detail in what they're asking for. So they're essentially saying, they've said stabilize. Does that mean stop them going up? Does that mean bring them down? I mean, it's also worth noting that in July, the rate of monthly food price inflation in Canada was actually less than the general rate of inflation. So there are more questions than answers here in this announcement.
Absolutely. So a lot of questions, vagaries, but then a very tight deadline, Thanksgiving. Do you think it's viable that the grocers will come up with something by then?
Well, I'd be surprised if we had anything concrete. To me, it's ironic, frankly, that we've been accusing the grocers of complicity or colluding, and now, frankly, the government is demanding they work together to come up on a plan. I'm not sure that these grocers get along that well, and everyone has different types. Are we asking them to have some products that are cheaper? Are we asking them to do it across the board? Are we saying, well, we should look at it from the perspective of, price chopper for Loblaws, or does it have to be across the board? There are a lot of questions here. I'm not sure we'll get a definitive answer by October by any means. What's interesting to me too, frankly, is that the Bank of Canada said that the grocers haven't contributed significantly. The Competition Bureau said we could use more competition, but they didn't find any definitive evidence that they were contributing to food price inflation. And so what we're asking the grocers to do is to buffer real price increases that are coming from other things like the war in Ukraine, extreme weather. So I'm not optimistic we'll get something in the next month.
Let's talk about some of the consequences, because the government has been clear that there will be some if they don't come forward with something tangible by Thanksgiving. One of them being some tax penalties. Do we see that actually being enough to push them towards a solution fast?
Well, if we tax the grocers more, the only way taxes work is if grocers avoid them and do stuff on prices. If they don't do something on prices and then the government taxes them more highly, unless they transfer that back to Canadians like they did with the GST thing this past summer, it won't really have any impact on us as Canadians. So what the government is hoping here is that the threat of taxation causes the grocers to do something that's poorly defined. Again, we don't know. Does it mean change their profit levels? Does it mean staples? Does it mean specific stores? Does it mean everything? We don't know. So my guess is that this won't do a lot to help Canadians unless grocers respond specifically and come out with something. And I expect that they'll say something at some point.
Right. And just last question here, Mike. A lot of critics out there might say, I don't trust the grocers to come up with a plan. Any plan that they have for us won't be a good one. How do we balance that, both the government and grocers, to making sure that whatever plan is put forward, that it's something that people are happy to see?
Well, that's a great question. And we have seen significant anger with grocers. So my guess is there'll be some skepticism. So unless the grocers come out and say specifically, we're going to freeze these prices like the no-name price freeze that we saw last year or something, it's going to be very difficult to measure. There are lots of other things that come into play here. If, for example, we had another situation like the war in Ukraine where wheat prices and vegetable oil prices went up, Do we say that the grocers can't pass any of that along, or that they need to absorb some of it? To me, the criteria with which the government will evaluate the grocers isn't clear, and that makes it particularly difficult for Canadians to feel good about what they might hear.
One thing's for sure, a lot of people will be looking at the results from that, especially as they do their Thanksgiving shopping. Mike Von Massow,
Exactly.
food economist and associate professor at the University of Guelph. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, and have a great day.
You too.